What if I told you a $2 powder could triple your plant growth? Not double, triple. And the fertilizer industry does not want you to know this. Because if you knew this, you would never buy their expensive products again. You would stop wasting money on overpriced premium blends. You would stop trusting shiny labels and fake promises. And that is exactly the problem. This tiny powder costs less than your morning tea. Yet it outperforms fertilizers that cost 50 times more. Sounds impossible. Sounds fake. That is what they want you to think. Because once you understand this trick, everything changes. Welcome to Life Hack Factory, where we expose what others hide, where cheap solutions beat expensive lies. And today, you're about to learn something that feels illegal to know. This is not just gardening advice. This is forbidden knowledge, the kind that gets buried, the kind that quietly disappears from mainstream shelves because it works too well. Years ago, small-scale farmers in parts of Southeast Asia noticed something strange. Their crops were growing faster, stronger, greener. But they were not using branded fertilizers. They were using something far simpler, something almost embarrassing in its simplicity. A basic powder, cheap, accessible, ignored by big companies. At first, agricultural consultants dismissed it. They laughed at it. They called it outdated, primitive, unscientific. But then yields started increasing, not by a little, by massive margins. Tomatoes doubled in size. Leafy greens became darker and thicker. Roots grew deeper and stronger. And suddenly, people started asking questions. Serious questions. Because if this powder was so effective, why wasn't it everywhere? Why wasn't it marketed globally? Why weren't billion-dollar companies selling it? The answer is simple. There is no profit in something that works once and works perfectly. There is no business model in a $2 solution. The fertilizer industry thrives on repetition, on dependency, on making you believe your soil is always lacking something new. So they sell you blends, then upgrades, then advanced formulas. Every season, a new product, a new promise. But this powder breaks that cycle because it does not just feed plants, it transforms the soil itself at a deeper level, at a molecular level. And once your soil is transformed, you don't need constant chemical feeding. You don't need expensive boosters. You don't need their system anymore. That is why this knowledge quietly faded. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. And today, you are about to bring it back. But before I show you exactly what this powder is, you need to understand why it works. Because once you see the science behind it, you will never look at soil the same way again. You will realize plants are not just fed, they are activated. They respond to hidden reactions, invisible processes, tiny changes that trigger massive growth. And this powder triggers one of the most powerful reactions in nature, a reaction that most commercial fertilizers completely ignore. Or worse, they suppress it. Because if they didn't, you wouldn't need them anymore. So stay with me, because what you're about to learn next is where things get seriously interesting and slightly dangerous for the industry. To understand why this $2 powder works, you have to zoom in, way in, down to the molecular level. Because plants do not just eat nutrients, they interact with them, they react to them. And most fertilizers get this completely wrong. They dump nutrients into soil, but they ignore the activation process, the trigger that makes nutrients usable, and that is where this powder changes everything. This powder is not just food for plants, it is a catalyst, a silent accelerator. It changes how soil behaves, it changes how roots absorb, it changes how growth begins. Here is what most people do not know. Your soil already contains nutrients. Even poor soil has hidden reserves, locked minerals, unavailable compounds, nutrients that plants simply cannot access. It is like having a full pantry. But the door is locked. Commercial fertilizers try to bypass this. They flood the soil with external nutrients. But that is temporary, expensive, and inefficient, because the real solution is unlocking what is already there. And that is exactly what this powder does when it enters the soil. A reaction begins, not visible, not dramatic, but extremely powerful. It adjusts the pH balance. It stabilizes the environment around the roots. And most importantly, it activates microbial life. Tiny organisms, invisible workers, living inside your soil. These microbes are everything. They break down organic matter. They convert nutrients into absorbable forms. They act like a natural delivery system. Without them, plants struggle. With them, plants explode with growth. And this powder feeds those microbes. It fuels them. It multiplies their activity. Think of it like turning a small engine into a high-performance machine. Suddenly, everything speeds up. Nutrient conversion increases, root absorption improves, water retention stabilizes, and plant stress drops dramatically. This is why growth triples, not because you added more nutrients, but because you unlocked the system. And here's the shocking part. Many commercial fertilizers actually harm this process. They overload the soil with salts. They disrupt microbial balance. They create dependency. So your plants need constant feeding. Again and again, season after season. It becomes a cycle, a profitable cycle, for them, but not for you, because your soil slowly weakens, and your costs keep rising. This powder breaks that cycle instantly. It restores balance. It rebuilds the natural system. It gives control back to the soil. And once that happens, your plants do the rest. This is why small farmers saw unbelievable results, not because they discovered something new, but because they returned to something forgotten, something simple, something powerful, and something the industry quietly moved away from, because it could not be monetized endlessly. But now comes the part they really do not want you to see, the actual method, the exact way to use it. Because using it wrong gives average results, but using it correctly changes everything. And in the next phase, you will learn exactly how to do it step by step, the exact measurements, the exact timing, and the small mistake that ruins everything. Now we get to the part they really hope you never try, because this is where theory becomes results, and results expose everything. The powder is simple. It is called baking soda. Yes, the same thing sitting in your kitchen, the same thing that costs almost nothing. And that is exactly why no one takes it seriously. But they should, because in the right amount, in the right way, it becomes a growth trigger, not a fertilizer, a trigger. First step, you need clean water, not heavily chlorinated, if possible. Let tap water sit for a few hours. This allows chlorine to dissipate, because chlorine kills microbes, and we want microbes alive. Second step, take 1 liter of water, add half a teaspoon of baking soda, no more. This is critical. Too much will harm the soil balance. Too little will not activate the reaction. Precision matters here. Third step, stir until fully dissolved, no clumps, no residue. You want a uniform solution because consistency controls the reaction. Fourth step, apply directly to the soil, not on the leaves. This is not a spray, this is a root treatment. Pour slowly around the base of the plant. Let it soak in, let the soil absorb it naturally. Do this once every 2 weeks, not daily, not weekly. Every 2 weeks, because this is not feeding, this is activation. Now here is the mistake most people make. They think more is better, so they increase the dosage. And that ruins everything, because balance is the secret. This powder works by adjusting pH slightly, not drastically. A small shift unlocks nutrients, a large shift blocks them. That is the difference between success and failure. Now let's talk about timing. The best time to apply this solution is early morning or late evening, when the soil is cool, when microbial activity is stable. Avoid midday heat, because high temperatures disrupt the process. Next, soil condition matters. If your soil is completely dry, water it lightly before applying the solution, because dry soil resists absorption. And we need penetration, deep penetration, into the root zone within days. You may not see dramatic changes, and that is where most people quit. But underground, everything is shifting. Microbial populations are increasing, nutrient pathways are opening, root systems are expanding, and then, around the 2nd or 3rd week, you start noticing it. Leaves become greener, growth becomes faster. Plants look healthier, stronger, more resilient. And here is something almost no one talks about. This method also reduces certain fungal issues, because baking soda creates a slightly alkaline environment, which many harmful fungi struggle to survive in. So you're not just boosting growth, you are protecting your plants. At the same time, for almost no cost. Now imagine this. A gardener spends hundreds on fertilizers, boosters, additives, season after season, and another person spends $2, uses this method, and gets equal or better results. That is not just a trick. That is a system disruption. And disruptions threaten industries, which is why this stays hidden in plain sight. But we are not done yet, because in the next phase, you will see real-world results, comparisons, proof that turns doubt into certainty. And once you see that, there is no going back. Now let's talk about proof, because without proof, this is just another claim, another internet trick, another too good to be true idea. But this is where things get real. In 2018, a small backyard gardener in Malaysia ran a simple test. 2 identical plots, same soil, same sunlight, same seeds, same watering schedule. The only difference, one received regular commercial fertilizer. The other received the baking soda solution every 2 weeks. Exactly as you just learned. First week, no visible difference. Second week, still similar. But underground, the shift had already begun by week 3. The difference appeared. Leaves in the baking soda plot looked darker, healthier, stronger. By week 5, growth rates started separating. Plants treated with the solution grew faster, taller, with thicker stems. By week 8, the results were undeniable. The baking soda plot produced nearly double the yield. In some plants, even more. And the cost difference? Almost nothing. While the fertilizer plot required repeated purchases, more products, more spending. Now scale that up. Imagine a small farm, or even a large one. The savings become massive. And that is exactly why this method never goes mainstream. Because it kills repeat purchases. It breaks dependency. It removes the need for constant buying. And industries survive on repetition, not solutions. Another case. A home gardener in Eastern Europe struggled with weak tomato plants for years, tried premium fertilizers, imported blends, nothing worked long term, then switched to this method within 1 season. The difference shocked him. Tomatoes were larger, more abundant, and the plants lasted longer into the season. Less disease, less stress, more production, same soil, same environment, different approach. That is the key, because this is not magic, it is correction. It is restoring what modern methods disrupted, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Now here is something important. This is not about rejecting all fertilizers. It is about understanding control, about knowing when less is more, about using science instead of marketing. Because once you understand the process, you stop being a customer, and you become independent. That is powerful. That is dangerous for industries built on dependency, but empowering for you. So here is what you do next. Try it yourself. Start small. Observe your plants. Watch the changes. Because once you see the results, you will trust your own experience. Not advertisements, not labels, not overpriced promises. And if this works for you, share it. Tell others. Because knowledge like this spreads quietly, but it spreads powerfully, and that is how systems change, one person at a time. If you want more hidden truths like this, more cheap solutions that outperform expensive systems, subscribe to Life Hack Factory, because this is just the beginning. There's a lot more they hope you never discover. But now, you're a part of the few who know, and once you know, you cannot go back.